Welcome to Noble, a network of owners, business leaders, and entrepreneurs. Here, we focus on the 5 stages of business: launching an idea, establishing a business, hiring employees, creating leaders, and then expanding your impact. We hope you enjoy today's session.
Please welcome JD Orr.
Well, thank you very much, Tanisha. Let me begin by stating this. You will never know what a distinct honor it is for me to be a part of this process today. I'm in a lifelong pursuit of making certain that what God gave to me, I'm certainly going to give back all that I have back to him and the people who I've been kind enough to know over the years. And it's been an absolute phenomenal journey. I could not begin to tell you the number of times I've been blessed unawares by a power that is greater than us. So I hope today that we're going to go through some situations where I think these intersections in life will begin to help us see what has taken place. And I think with the Lord's help, we're going to see some neat things coming about growth, giving back, contributions, dedication to craft, and above all else, being a great servant to mankind that's really missing in this culture today. So my plan today is to hopefully inspire individuals to keep moving on, advancing the cause, and taking the gifts that God has given them and pass it on as a heritage. So thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with the Noble Group. I have great respect for the organization and cannot thank you enough for the time here this morning. So with that, as is custom, there's a very prominent pastor in London that every single week, he always dedicated his time to go to different organizations and put on public speaking engagements just to help inspire the community. So one evening, all said and done, he's finished, leaves the assembly hall and hops on the double-decker bus and heads back to his office in South London. He sits down and pays his fare. And it's interesting enough, the conductor walks up to him and hands him his change back. And so the pastor is sitting there and he looks at the change and the conductor had given to him, and he starts counting it. And he goes, "Wait a minute. This isn't right here." So he counts it again. So about 3 or 4 times he goes through this count system, and it really kind of haunted his spirit because he looked at it and said, "Well, the things are pretty tight, and I could use this, but at the same time, this is not the right thing to do." So eventually, the bus arrives at his office in near the Mayfair area in London. He gets up and knocks up to the conductor and said, "Sir, I hate to inform you this, but I think you made a mistake. You gave me too much change." And the conductor looked back at the pastor and said, "Oh, no, sir, I did not make a mistake. See, I attended your address last night, and you were talking about integrity. I just put you to the test." What an enormous intersection that was, because if you look at that from the point of view of two strangers coming from nowhere, all of a sudden they met at an intersection. And I'm going to refer to intersections in life here today, not so much like roundabouts or 4-way stops, but people, situations in life that are presented to us that we have to make decisions upon. So I thought that was a very incredibly powerful example of what it really means in this interchange of getting in the intersection. All of a sudden the conflict came. So what happened was the takeaway from him was inspiration. Someone out there actually has a heart and a consciousness to do the right thing. And the takeaway from the actual conductor was, wow, integrity still exists. So those two things become extremely powerful in terms of the interchange of making the right decisions at the right time, no matter what the circumstances are, whether the outcome is good or bad. It always pays off. As I said, my company, for example, my business call plan is very simple: honesty at all costs. So with that interruption, for example, what happens there, oftentimes those situations in an intersection, they'll cause us to make decisions. But at the same time, they'll also cause us, hopefully, to be really interrupted. And I'm talking about an interruption that's extremely major. So let me walk through some things here from my career and the experiences I've gone through that I can honestly tell you were divinely inspired. They were with God. I didn't cause them to happen. They just came about because of the situation that from a very young age, as a kid, I always felt there was something unique about this whole idea about spirituality. Even though my family was not really religious or spiritual, but I always felt there was a power there that was guiding me. And I don't know how I can explain that any more than that. There was a very strange set of circumstances, but I'll be forever grateful. What happened to the outcome is it all went together. So I think the interruption that I want to go through, just give some highlights about my career and what has happened through the course of time and how I got from there to here. The first one I'll never forget. I worked on a road commission, for example, during the summer months in Michigan, and I had a road commission job for Wayne County, and we'd go out there and repair work, etc. And one fine day, we'd go out there, and every day I took a sketchbook with me to work. And the interesting thing was that I sat down on a tree at lunchtime. I'd just start drawing cars, just sketches and so forth in general. So the truck driver, his name was Fran Russell. I will never forget this man as long as I live. As the Lord liveth, that man walked up to me and he said, "Hey, JD, what are you doing?" So I'm just drawing cars. I just love to sketch. I'd love to become a designer one day. He said, "That's interesting." My brother-in-law, Maurice, he's a sculptor at Ford Motor Company. And he is really involved in a lot of design work and so forth. You should take his sketches and gather it all together, and I'll call him and make an appointment and have you go down to Dearborn and look at your sketches. That 30 seconds of time changed my life. I had no concept or idea, for example, that the design world was even out there. At the time, I was going to a major university and psychology and business practices, but I had no idea that industrial design existed. And it's odd today that it still has a bit of a mystery in the marketplace. So all that to say that situation, those 30 seconds, I will never forget. It changed my entire life. So fast forward, I'd go from there, went on to transferred all my sketches, all my information down to the Center for Creative Studies in Detroit, Michigan, and went through a 4 or 5 year program there. And it was absolutely monumental. Second intersection that I could not deny, and I'll never forget as well. Many of you might not know the name of Sid Mead, but Sid Mead was an instructor at CCS, along with guys like Keith Freeland, Alex Homer Gassi, absolute monumental stars in the industrial design. So I had Sid Mead, for example, and you might be familiar with, for example, Sid's work as an instructor there. He came out of North Dakota, a very spiritual family, moved on to Art Center, graduated at the age of 16, went to Ford Motor Company, and at that time became the chief designer of Thunderbird Studios. After about 2 years, he just said, "That's it, I give up." I started my own studio. He started Obregon in California. We've been friends over the years. I've never lost contact with him. But the point I'm making is that Sid Mead was an individual who, for example, had tremendous drawing skills. I can still remember, for example, again, he was divinely inspired, and I think I was really a part of that process of him being a part of that company from day to day in classroom situations. But I can sincerely tell you, there are days when I'm coming into work or I'm traveling to a certain point or a destination or a design presentation, and I'll go, "Oh, that's what he meant." 30 years later, 40 years later, he still has a profound impact in my mental aspect of looking at the design process. But his fame, for example, Tron, Star Wars, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Star Trek, Elysium, on and on the list went. Spielberg's programs, for example, incredible litany of design systems. All the illustration work and all the conceptual design work you see in those films came from a Sid Mead. So fast forward again, the third intersection. I graduate from the Center for Creative Studies. I go to Detroit, Michigan, and all of a sudden I'm waiting for the call. I graduate, and all of a sudden I get the call from General Motors design staff. And believe me, again, the Lord inspired this whole situation. I'm convinced with all my heart. I get the call from General Motors. "You're invited to come up. We'd like to sit down and interview you for a position of design staff here." So I go to the design staff. I go in there and have the intersection, and it literally, they put me and said, "Well, I think you're a candidate for design here. We're going to put you in design development for about 3 months and see if it all works out." So, Lord willing, it works out. I'm now a staff member of General Motors design staff, and believe me, I still think to this day there are times in my office at home when I just sit back in the quiet moments, and I'll think to myself, "Oh God, how did this happen?" Here's a little kid from Glasgow, Scotland, now working for the largest design firm on the globe. And it has to be designed. And I went through the process of the design. It was an absolute magical. And I was so fully prepared by people like Legassi and Sid Mead. I walked in there, and it was absolutely a cakewalk. I was so well prepared by these people. And the biggest lesson I learned from both those individuals in education, again, was the simple fact that always be a servant to others. You're not always right. And I think that situation really has helped me through the years in terms of putting together hopefully design processing, public speaking engagements, helping young people find their goals and dreams and their aspirations in life. It's been absolutely phenomenal. So at design staff, I'm working away, and I started at Oldsmobile, and we did some of the Toronado series, the 98s and 88s. And I went through the whole process, but then I got a call from, at that time, it was Bill Mitchell. Bill Mitchell was the chief executive of design. I got a call from Bill Mitchell. Hey, Jim, you got to come down to the office. I said, oh, here we go. I'm going to be fired. What did I do now? But Bill sat me down and said, we're going to assign you to a very special project. I said, Bill, what is that special project? We're going to assign you to the four-rotor Corvette. You're going to be working with Zora Arkus-Duntov. You're going to be working with individuals that you'll absolutely overwhelmed by. Chuck Jordan, for example, and great names of design in the past. Unreal, Stan Parker, people that were really made a tremendous impact in the design business. So we started the four-rotor program. That was about a 3-month program, and it was interesting because Zora at that time. So we organized a real special little skunkworks trunk in the basement of design staff. So during the day, I'd be up in Chevrolet working away on certain things like big sedans and coupes, etc. And then at night we'd go down from about 5 to about midnight working on Corvette secret plant work and so forth. So all that came to pass, but the thing that was unique about it was when we got the information from Zora said, well, I'm going to send you all the information you need to design this new car. So that's wonderful. So we get 4 tires in the frame. And he said, gentlemen, you have 3 months to build a full-size running machine called the C8 Corvette, and it'll be going to Paris and be interviewed and debuted at the Paris Auto Show. 3 months from nothing. Sketches, clay model, fiberglass, changes, adjustments, interior, exterior. The whole thing had to work, and in order to qualify for the Paris Auto Show, it had to run. So here we are at the last minute. We're in mechanical assembly and at design staff, and all of a sudden we go through the whole process. We're trying to start it. It wouldn't start. It was a 4-rotor engine. Wouldn't start. So we shipped it in a crate, went to Paris, and a crew went with them and interviewed, for example. And the day of debut in the Paris Auto Show, they cranked over the ignition, and it worked beautifully. Sad story to end it all, though. We came back stateside, had great reviews. This is a new mid-engine Corvette. And that was about late 70s, early 80s. And sure enough, that time the fuel crisis came on board. And Ed Cole at that time was the president of General Motors Design, or corporation rather, canceled the program with the small car technology. But it didn't stop there. So again, the next intersection for me was very unique in terms of what happened next. Was as a result of all the work I had done on the 4-rotor Corvette, they called me in again and said, well, we've got a special assignment for you. I said, oh, no, not again. Yeah, we're sending you to Europe. We're sending you to Opel to become the chief designer of Opel design staff in Rüsselsheim, West Germany. So we packed up the family, for example, went to Rüsselsheim. It was about a 3 to 6 months assignment and so forth. And that intersection was absolutely incredible because here again, decisions made. Do we want to do this? Should we do this? It's a career advancement. Yes, it's wonderful. It's going to be a great experience, but we did so. And I think the education in that whole situation was absolutely overwhelming. For example, I arrive at Rüsselsheim. So the first thing they tell me to do, you're going to be involved in a World Car program for GM. It's Holden, Vauxhall, and also Opel and subsidiary systems around the globe. So all the things moving along. And then during the time of that, the reason I brought the Opel situation up in Europe was very unique because what was really neat about that was that there was a lot of interchange with manufacturers in that whole process. So during the whole process of being in Europe at Opel, we traveled into, for example, Italy, in Germany, and so forth. I had the pleasure of meeting and working with Enzo Ferrari on some of the early F12 series and some of the Testarossa series. Very unique individual. Met him at the Paris Auto Show, the Geneva Auto Show, and we went through a whole set of circumstances. Met Sergio Pininfarina. These individuals, for example, again, here's this little kid from Glasgow, Scotland, standing there with him, Impresario, from Italian. It's just amazing, absolutely amazing. But the lessons learned were phenomenal. I could tell you, I could go on in stories about that European education. Again, Ferdinand Porsche, Lamborghini, Maserati, Rolls-Royce, Bentley. We just made the circuit with all these individuals that were really involved in the design process at that time. And I was very fortunate to see a lot of great things, educationally speaking, that were just absolutely phenomenal. So unique in that aspect. So for the fourth intersection, I think is critical in this decision-making process in my career, and hopefully we will be of some help to people out there listening to this podcast today, is very simple. I came back stateside, and I got assigned to Cadillac and Advanced Automobile Systems for General Motors. So in that whole process, I got to meet with individuals, for example, major suppliers and phenomenal individuals down the line that helped put this whole process together. Chuck Jordan at that time was the chief of the vice president of design staff. And we started a whole new process of getting away from the very round forms and very kind of softy shapes that we're looking on in the marketplace. We went to a very sheer geometry, very crisp and hard-edged, and almost like a leading cutting-edge process, and it became the CTS program. And out of that program came, I think, one of the most unique vehicles at that time that we worked again with Dave Hill and engineering, and again Zora was involved in that as well. But one of the platforms that made a huge success in the marketplace was what we refer to as the CTS shooting brake. That's a station wagon, but the history of that shooting brake is extremely interesting. It got its name during the British elites, for example, in all the manors and households, they'd have a shooting brake, and that was a wagon pulled by horses that had all the racks on it, for example, and with all the shotguns, and they'd go out and hunt. And all the pheasants would hang on the shooting brake. They bring it back to the estate and have a preparation dinner and so forth. So we took that name and brought it into the Cadillac family, and it was enormously successful. Just a very unique, very rare platform to work with. So as it went on, it just was very unique. So the next intersection I think that was really phenomenal for me was an education. I came back from that again at the design staff, and I was really involved in a lot of training systems and moving through workshops and seminars and traveling the globe and putting on workshops and young people, for example, in clinics. And the more I traveled, the more I began to hear young people say, how do you become a designer? What's the process? And it really kind of struck my heart in terms of, well, on the way back one time from Europe in a flight, I just happened to sit down and began to put some notes together. I said, what if, and what if, what if, and what if? Just a series of questions. So I got back stateside and went down to Chuck's office, design staff, and said, Chuck, I've got a thought here. It might be hard for me to accept, and it might be hard for you to accept. I'm not sure, but I'm going to propose it anyhow. I'd like to become General Motors ambassador, the Pied Piper of design for young people globally. And he looked at me and said, how in God's name are you going to do that? I said, you just said it, in God's name. I'm going to do this in God's name. Pardon me for becoming emotional. But again, another situation that dramatically changed my life. He looked at me and said, we couldn't think of a finer ambassador. We'll support you any way we can. So it took me 6 months to resign. He told me later that we wouldn't let you go because you're on the list becoming the next vice president of design staff. I didn't want that. I seriously didn't want that. Those of you listening out there, if there's one thing you gleaned from this presentation this morning, please glean this. Your accomplishments in life are meaningless. It's the connections you make along the way that make an enormous difference. Now, I was fortunate right from square one to make incredible connections, people that I love to be around, and shared wisdom and information from a spiritual perspective on what our craft presented us by God is intended to do. It's intended not to be kept. It's intended to be stepped out there and literally manifest itself in the marketplace and inspire individuals, no matter what their status in life, to achieve goals that are monumental. So, sorry, it came about. I left and I came to Columbus, Ohio, and I started a company called Advanced Formations. It was a consulting firm. And all of a sudden, the doors opened up. I got to meet great young people. Went into a ministry, for example, I could call it a ministry, traveling to go and putting on workshops and clinics for young people. I was all over the place, but it was just enormously a lot of fun. There was never a lot of stress. It was just great fun to listen to young people say about the fact, what if I could do this? Or what if I could do that? The timeout. No one in this room is going to say, what if? We're all going to say, I will. And the next one who says, what if? You're going to owe me $100. And I've got a bucket right here, painted gold. It's called the JD Retirement Fund. Thank you very much for your contribution. So we're not going to allow you to do that. Why? Because sometimes, as we all know, again, those who are in the listening audience, and I speak to myself, I'm speaking to myself here today as well, more so to myself than the audience out there that is kind enough to listen. Then we all know that what we think about day to day, we eventually become. If we listen to those strange voices, for example, all of a sudden it begins to detour the whole idea of the experience and what the interruption really fully meant. The real purpose of that interruption in our life is to teach us and guide us to make the right decisions at the right time for the right people. You're listening to a voice that has listened to that all through his days and has come back 1,000-fold. I could not begin to tell you how much I'm grateful for people that I've gotten to know. And I just mentioned the gang the other day, we're putting the presentation together. I said, every year I'm stunned, for example. And again, I'm going to hopefully take this in the proper context, please. Every year I get cards and letters from young people I worked with over the years. For the past 50 some odd years I've had my company. I get cards and letters from young people all the time about how grateful they are about us getting together, interacting, and watching them move on. We've got them in key positions. One of my former students is a global director of Cadillac at GM. Another one is a global director of Chevrolet at GM. Ferrari, I mean, they're all over the globe, product design, architectural work, and so forth. Just a really tremendous bit of information. So that's a quick capsulization of what I refer to as the intersections and why this whole presentation is put together. Once again, coming back to base theme, the reason that intersections are placed in our life is to encompass us and to guide us to make the right decisions at the right time. Now, they might not always work well, but there will be certain ways along the way to kind of amend that and make those adjustments. So I think that's really vital, for example, that often I really feel this to say as well. I'm fully committed to the fact that without interruptions in our life, we'll never learn what confidence really means. Confidence, to me, is a product of being conflicted. If you have a conflict that comes along and it begins to really kind of, for lack of another term, disturb your soul, or it becomes vexing, that means, for example, that something out of this is going to become very, very powerful, very monumental. The more placid it is, the less powerful it is. The more conflicting it is, the more powerful it is. The conflict is what gives it confidence. I mean, I've gone through certain design processes where I've gone through workshops and design staff and going through presentations, for example. I start doing some sketch work and illustration sketches, and I'll get questions and answers afterwards. How did you come up with that comment? My comment was very simply, I don't know. I think it was divine. It just comes from the Lord. I open that up. Lord, every time I go through a presentation, every time I go through a design process or an assignment comes in to solve, as a resource working with my client base, the first thing I say is, Lord, this is yours. Open the doors. Help me to go through this process to help those people achieve their goals. So all that to say, for example, what's the end result of what are some of the results, and well, basically speaking, the end results of that whole idea of interruptions and intersections. First of all, the interruptions, for example, create innovations. Not innovations from a product point of view, not an element you can pick up and hold, but the innovations of the mind. How the mind begins to innovate certain thoughts and ramifications of yays and nays and do's and don'ts. And the juxtaposition of, if I do this, this happens. If I take this route, that will happen. That innovative side of our mind is always active. Again, it's because it was created by a powerful God who put it all together and said, look, I made you, and I'm going to create you, and I'm also going to put you in some testing situations. And the reason I'm testing you is to find out if you gave the right change back. Integrity, inspiration, they all work hand in hand. Now, the great thing about the innovation in the mind is eventually what takes place is extremely more powerful. It ladders up every time you go through a situation like this. It's absolutely phenomenal. After the innovation comes together, the great portion of it is now you've got an invitation. The innovation in the mind has invited you to make a choice. And the choice really is what I refer to, it's inspiring. Why is it inspiring? Because that triad, interruption, innovation, invitation, that triad opens up the door, what I refer to as revealing to us our true self. The real us, not the imposter, not the mask we put on in all the clouds so the people can see who I am. I had an individual tell me once, a very prominent name, for example, in the design business down in Florida. He walked into the room and said, do you know who I am? I looked at him and I said, yes, I do. You are totally meaningless. I got up and left. I could not tolerate the fact that that kind of arrogance, by the way, he was an hour late for a meeting. Do you know who I am? If you have to tell people how good you are, you're not very good. But if you can show, for example, by your disposition, by your demeanor, by your kindness, by your ability to accept and really receive oftentimes severe criticism and still battle through it and still become victorious. That's what God wants us to do. Face the situation, square your shoulders, do not blink, move on, help, assist, become part of the process. Don't be out of the circumstance, be in the circumstance. I believe this with all my heart. All through the years, it's been interesting to me that I believe fully, and hopefully this will help those out there in the audience as well, as much as it's helped me over time. Anybody's experience is far greater than anybody else's theory. You can theorize all you want to, but God has given us a purpose. He has given you a soul. He's given you an objective life to live. He's given you a realm that's infinite. All of them will come to you. All of them will come to you. You gravitate. They'll gravitate to you. I don't ask for situations to come along. By the way, I have not done an ounce of marketing. I think I've spent about 2 cents in marketing all of my days. Am I proud of that? No. I'm grateful for that. The reason it's happened is because all these things about being caught in the intersection and having to make a decision, all of a sudden, because of the work you do and how you project yourself through your audience and what happens in that situation, people recognize who was that masked man. You have to know this person. Notice we don't talk about ourselves. We're talking about what others have done for us and what we're going to do for them. It's overwhelming to me. So the whole true self comes about as a result of that triad working together to show us how inspiring it can become. So it really launches us into meaningful departures. I mean, meaningful and powerful departures. Again, conflict, confidence, arrival, departure, interruption, innovation, and an invitation to move on and on and on. It just goes and goes and goes. There's no end to it. Why? Because we serve an infinite God. Why would you put borders on something, for example, when there are no borders? When you look at infinity, I'm astounded at the fact the infinite power of the Lord absolutely amazes me. When I go through the drawing process, I mean, I just hope that my first thing is, Lord, I've got a blank sheet of paper. I paid 30 cents for it. For God's sakes, don't make me make a mistake. No, that's my Scots nature coming out of me, I'm sure. But nonetheless, that's how I feel. Lord, it's yours. Guide this thing. Take us through it. So while we go through that whole idea, now we've seen what the triad looks like and what the whole concept looks like and what the complexities of that concept are. Let's take a look at some very simple scenarios here. I think it'd be very interesting. Let's put that into practice. For example, when you look at that whole idea, let's say you're faced with a situation or a decision you have to make, or a problem comes along, or a situation or an assignment you have to solve comes along. First thing I'd like to have you focus on is this, is a 3-step process. Number 1, look at the whole problem and literally push back. Push back in a sense, for example, the first step to confidence is to push back. Push back what? Fear and doubt. Push back on it. That becomes perception. The perception of how you see it. What's the scale of it all? I've often said this, if it's bigger than me, that's God given. If it's smaller than me, it doesn't matter. If it's huge, God will take care of it. I'll tell you in a few moments about the story about Dr. Contrast. Again, astounding to me, overwhelming, God-driven, not me. But that first step coming out to create this thing is push back. Those of you who are starting into business, those of you young people out there in the audience, or individuals in the professional life, when you face conflict and you see things coming against the face, that force that pushes against you, be really confident, stand back and push back on the situation, politely and kindly. Get rid of the fear and the doubt. Be assertive, be strong and bold. Your statement should be your whole countenance should be there in the commentary that you're making. So the first step in that whole idea is to push back, allow the perception to take place, see it for what it really is. Second step, stand still. That's hard for me to do. It's hard for all of us to do, but stand still. Why? The stillness allows us to begin to see, for example, what the vision is. What I've gotten to, well, I'm going to see the perception, step 1, now I've perceived it. Now the next step is, what's the vision? Where are the gaps? How am I going to fill in the marketplace? What gifts do I have or possess that God gave me that I can fill in and do a tremendous job of saying, you know what, we've serviced that group and it's growing ad infinitum. It's exploding. Why? Because God gave you that vision. God gives all of us vision. I remember that line, Chuck Jordan, for example, doing the Corvette. I didn't go back for a moment. I've got to inject this story because I use it all the time, and I think it's really meaningful. For example, this whole idea about vision. We were doing the Corvette surveys at design staff, and all the clay models were out on the patio, for example. And Bill Porter walked up to Chuck Jordan. Bill Porter, a good friend of mine, chief designer Buick. He was part of the review committee. He comes in, and all of a sudden, he starts talking about, well, Chuck, it's got this slope line that does this, and it's got a really slim upper, very tight fenders, very close coupling. I mean, really profound design, don't you think, Chuck? Jordan picked him up by the lapels, walked over the wall, and said, Willie P., I want to tell you something, and I hope you never forget it. I'm real hard of hearing, but I've got 20/20 vision. I never forgot that as long as I live. You can talk ad infinitum about how good you are or what you do. People don't care. They don't care how much you know until you know how much they care. That's the difference. So the idea of being able to speak well, yes, that's important. But when it's, for example, when I go to a design meeting or a consultation, they start to speak. I'm listening very carefully, and I just start to convey on paper what their vision is. And then the first thing they said, how do you do that? And please forgive the answer I'm going to give you, but it's from the soul. Genius, pure genius. Why? Because God is that genius. The Lord opens those doors. He tells you quietly, that still voice in the back of your mind, yes, they're speaking, but you're seeing their vision. And remember, not you, it's their vision, not yours. So my commentary there, I think that's it. The whole idea of getting the vision down. Step 2, stand still. Close it all out. Shut the doors. Be pensive. The last phase. Once you go through the idea of seeing it and going through, eliminating the doubt and the fear, and you start to see the vision, the last thing is really, and I mean this with every ounce within me, and I'm going to pound the table on this one, light a fire. How do you light a fire? Very simple. Pursue your dream. What is it? What did God give you to do? How are you going to achieve it? What pieces are missing in the marketplace that you can fill in? Mine was the idea of seminar work and technology and getting into ideas and sketch rendering skills and guiding young people into careers, not only in automobile design, but all manner of design. So that dream is there. And I was able, through the help of the Lord and by the Lord, to fill that gap. So that whole concept there said, light that fire. Why the fire? Because, you don't want to become a burning bush. That only lasted for about a period of time. This fire is eternal. Eternal. What you do today, for example, as myself as an example, when I'm long gone, I hope that fire that we helped assist young people start burns incessantly all of their days. So that they begin to see, for example, that's really the most important in life, as far as I'm concerned. It's the importance of what you leave behind, not what you take with you. What you leave behind. There are individuals, for example, I can tell you from day to day, there are individuals that I've worked with, for example, you leave the presence of their company and you know full well they're talking about you. That's fine. You've made an impact. But don't go back and tell them, gee, thank you very much. That's so nice of you to say that about me. Keep it quiet. Be still. See the vision. And I think another lesson learned too from the idea, if those of you, again, going through the holiday, of looking for the dreams, for example, and lighting that fire, when you make those presentations, I fully hope you understand this. When you go through the gifts of putting, let's say it's a sketch rendering and making sketches for a certain product design, and you put your sketches up on the wall. I was taught by Sid Mead and Homer Lagasse, who was Detroit. Whenever you go through a presentation, be so well prepared, walk into the room and do the following. Number 1, put your sketches up on the wall. Turn to your audience and say, there aren't any questions, are there? Then leave the room. Oh, how arrogant is that? My goodness. No, that's not arrogance. I'll call it preparedness. You're fully prepared. The secret to that whole process is this. A, you've got to be ready. B, you have to be really, really confident in the fact that you've covered all the bases. Leave the room. Why? Because people in this world do not like to make decisions. That's a fearful thing for them. We make the decisions, but it comes from them. So the reason for leaving the room is to give them time to look it all over. Guess what happens when I walk back into the room? And when you walk back into the room, let me tell you what's going to happen. They'll look at you and they'll say the following, JD, which ones do you like? All of a sudden you're doing this. Thank you very much. You're just reading them all in. Why? Because your presence was sensed as being confident, not placid. committed, not fearful, and above all else, there to serve their needs, not yours or mine. It all works together. So I hope that helps, for example, to put this whole idea of intersections together. They come along as a result of having a necessary point of departure. But first you have to arrive. You arrive at what? Arrive at situations in life that are going to change you dramatically. 30 seconds in that truck stop at lunchtime changed my life. At General Motors Design Staff, could you imagine being called into the office and saying, you're going to be assigned to this, you're going to be assigned to that? I was not a great talent. I work with phenomenal talent. But someone when I left, Chuck Jordan looked at me and said, you know what? I'm going to miss you, Jim. JD, I'm going to miss you. You have an enormous spirit. There's something about you that's different. So Chuck, tell you what, about a week from now, I'm going to buy you a cup of coffee. I'm going to tell you about a power that's greater than General Motors Design Staff. I'm also, same thing with John DeLorean. I worked with John DeLorean and Chevrolet for about 2 or 3 years. He did all that kinds of neat stuff. So he started the whole process of getting the Corvette put together. So Ozarkas Duntov. I'm not bringing these names up because isn't it nice to be? I was just grateful to work with these people that had a profound impact in my life. So what I'd like to do is the following. I just think it's interesting, for example, when it's all said and done, why the result? What's the net result of this triad of pushback, standstill, and literally light a fire? What's the real pushback? When you go through that life, those interruptions in your life will do the following for us. They will lead us to live a life that will learn to love. There's no question about that. That's undeniable. That's already cemented. That's gospel. That's given, for example. The second thing is, what will really happen is I'm going to show you an example. As a result of that whole life, I'm coming back from Italy, for example, at Panini Furniture Studios, all through the Appian Way. I stopped at the top of the mountains, and I'm there, and all of a sudden I hear this whistling in the valley down below. Just something whistling. So I kept watching, and then behind the mountainscape comes this huge, enormous, massive amount of sheep, whole flock of sheep. And then all of a sudden the shepherd comes in behind them. I stood there and I thought, that's it. Lesson learned. Great leadership comes from behind. It's a support clause. It's a power that sees from behind and moves ahead. That shepherd, all he had to do was whistle. They'd move right, they'd move left. He followed those commands. Number 2, Sid Mead, for example. When I graduated from CCS and moved on to General Motors Design Staff, he sat me down and said, JD, I'm going to give you some advice. Hope you live with it all your life. It's simply this. The best piece of work you'll ever do, you've yet to see. He was right. I can't begin to tell you, I'm doing things today, I'm growing ad infinitum. It's amazing the kind of things I'm getting into now because I've never settled on, gee, isn't this wonderful? I'm done. I've arrived. Those who think you've arrived, you're dead and you don't know it. I'm not being rude here. Never arrive. Get to a station, depart. Get to a station, depart. Why? Interrupt, interrupt, interrupt. Leads us onto that whole triad of success. Lastly, a lot of times we try to, when I was travel out to New Jersey, Ferrari's headquarters in New Jersey. I got to know a doorkeeper at the hotel real well. So one day I bought him a cup of coffee. He sat down, we had a chat about it. I said, Frank, what is it about your job that you enjoy the most? And I'll never forget the comment he made. He said, I got a chance to see some really powerful people. I get to say hello, get to shake their hand, get to chat a little bit about what their life is all about. But he said, but JD, the one thing I've learned about this job is this. It is better, greater to be the doorkeeper than the doormat. And I thought, man, on the way home, I thought, wow, what a comment that is. This man stands in front of a very, very prestigious hotel, and all he does is open the door to allow people in. So what's the analogy? JD, Lord, JD, Lord to JD. You are now the doorkeeper. Open the door. Let them see your world. Let them enjoy the manifestation of the gift I gave them. Let them see it. Not just to see it, but to live it. And above all else, when you've lived it, you love it. I can honestly tell you, I don't think I've ever gone to work a day in my entire life. Never. It's joyful. joy unspeakable and full of glory. Do I deserve it? No. But I know this. What I do deserve to say is this, that the Lord God Almighty deserves all the credit. He's been with me all of my days. And how do you put that in perspective? How do you say thank you? How do you do what the obvious is? Put the humble bow before a power that is so great, so infinite, so caring, so necessary in our life. There'd be a vacuum without it. So what I'm going to do now is try to gather myself here. Sorry for being emotional. It just gets to me because I'm so grateful, humbled by the fact that you're here, I'm here, and we're talking about a little kid's life out of Glasgow, Scotland. Before I go to the table, I'm going to put this whole thing, I'm going to put this whole triad into some sort of a practical look and do a little sketch demonstration for you. But I'd like to say this in closing to it, and we'll pick it up at the end of it all. In closing, again, my sincere gratitude to the Noble Group. I mean, what an honor to be here this morning. I hope it's been as much fun for you as it has been for me. Brought back a lot of memories and to hold all the tears back. And it means a lot to me, a lot. Grateful for the fact that this Noble Crew, the people behind the scenes that put this thing together, Tanisha, Corey, Chaz, Susie, on and on the list, Brian, absolutely phenomenal individuals. Great to be, I'm grateful to know them. They're a blessing ad infinitum. But hopefully to them and to me, I want to close with this. I'll go back into that sketch rendering bit here. Some people wait for success to come. My advice, leave without it. It'll meet you in the intersection. Thank you.
And as we're waiting to go for him to go to his sketchboard, if you've got questions, you can start dropping those in the chat as well. And then we'll go to question and answers in just a little bit.
Are we all ready to go? Can everybody hear me okay?
You're good to go.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well, let's do this. I'm going to take a moment here and go as rapidly as I can, but thoroughly as I can, to show you what that triad that we talked about earlier, for example, about the whole idea of being pushing back and then seeing the vision and then lighting a fire. So I'm going to go through a process. This is a very typical approach that I use, for example, going through, like in this case, a transportation design. Oftentimes we'll start with a very, what I refer to as a very moody approach, for example, called empathy. It's an emotional side of what are you seeing and what maybe the message is going to become about as a result of going through this process. So let me just start here. Let's go back in here and I'll just fire some lines down and I'll beef them up as we go. Just nice and easy. Beef them up. This is called empathy. Just a very simple series of strike lines. No content yet. This is just the basis of a theme. Strike through it. Notice, real fluid, very gestury, for example, all the way through. So that can be all right. Okay, we got it. So there it is, number one. That's the actual empathy, for example, just a nice little strike line. Now putting a ground line down to give me a reference line to work with, that's what's happening here. So there's a basic study in empathy. What that means is it's a very simple emotion, for example, what the lines might be telling me to do. What's the theme? Notice it's not very busy, it's not overdone. It's just a simple, if you get down to 3 lines or less, that tells a huge story. Number 2, let's go back and look at this. Now let's get a ground line base in here. Put that down to ground. Let's take that whole thing. This is now the perception, or the example, for example, the pushback, getting rid of fear, laying down your idea and getting it all set. Now the second step, for example, this is now the perception. This is now the actual process. So we're going to go through and take that perception and begin to refine it a little bit and tune it in to become much more design related. So let's go back again. Now the first thing I'm going to do is now, lay down a wheel. Go back and count them back. Get the scale right, get the scale down. Now, I'm back in, pick up the same theme from step one. Go to glass graphics, lay that in there. Get that slope line to work. Let that come through. The parts. A little bit of tone in this thing. Down the ground. Backside tire. A little bit of perspective on this thing. A little bit of tone work in here. Practice some line weight changes. Find the center line. Rear wheel. Let me switch gears here. Okay, you're gonna hear a very strange sound here. That's the sound you never hear. It's called a pencil sharpener. So anyway, there we are. Got it? Back again to the sketch. Just putting the pieces together here. A little ventilation system and a little bit of an intake piece here. Take that back. Let's get this thing all set up here. And just put a little bit more detail in this guy. We call that the second part of the whole, but this is the vision. Very simple little detail. So there you go. First of all, let's go back and review here. This is now the first sketch, for example, is again the perception, pushing back the fear and the doubt. Second step, getting the process down. For example, what that beauty start to look like. What kind of character is it going to have? What's the essence of it going to become? Notice again, last but not least, I'm going to put this aside here. Now we're going to take that from, again, the actual perception. Now the process, now we're going to look at the product. Now, but let's put this thing in some sort of real time here. So back in here. First of all, I'm going to plant the wheels. Come back in perspective. Take this whole, that second step and move it into a third dimension here, the third phase. Into the fender line. Oh. Bring it across. In the front end graphic. Far side fender. Into the upper. Very fluid. Hopefully it all works. Just kind of cranking through a little bit of line weight change. Let's get back into the cowl around the front end area here. Let's finish that area off here. Let's get this down. Now let's take this through into the body side of the fender, into the flare here. Run that through. Change a little bit of notice. As I go through the theme here, I'm just laying this sketch out. I'm getting a lot more lucid in terms of putting more definition in the actual form we started above it. So let's go back in through here. Sorry where that A pillar is. Let's get that in place. Let's run that through. Find the center line, drop that in. Lighting situation. Little by little, we're just going to build this. Sketches should be built. You're building a process. Put a little bit of hood graphics in here where the fender intercepts into the cowl. Same thing here. Let's put a little tone across the glass here. Bring in. Get that fender to work. Rear view mirrors. Rear view mirrors. Just trying to walk your way through this thing. A little bit of tone work in here where the far side fender is. Step this back. Put a little bit of tone in front of this guy a bit. There it is. Now let's ground it. Come back in and get the ground plane in the shadow. In the ground plane in the shadow. Very lightly lay that in. Again, this is the product. Another way of saying light that fire. This is what you now have seen. Very simple. Just very light little tones here. It's going to be a more sharper pencil here. Horizon line reflecting back in the glass. A little bit of a tone change. With the daylight, and let's put a little bit of intake piece back here on the upper quarter. Run that through. Find it just a bit more here, kind of clean it up a little bit. There we are. Backside graphics. Put a little tone in through here. Underbody. A little bit of shadow back inside that offset brake on the body of the quarter panel. Run that back through again. Let's tighten down that shadow just a bit more. Reflected in the glass. Got the sharper stick here. Pardon me just a moment. No, sharpen this guy up. I'm almost there. Filling in some of the graphics of the intake up front. This is all aero system up front. Just a simple draft coming through the machine here. Not a lot of fuss, not a lot of front end graphics, just a nice little simple overlay of more aero and less decoration. Just going to get that line to go through. Just got more shadow inside this upper lower draft here. This aero fin. Make sure that that looks like it's got some scale to it here. A little bit of aero on it. Now let's get this down here. Let's put just an indication where the tire might be. And again, the rear tire. More tone up on top. Just a nice little soft change to the whole body forming on the pillar side. Into the underbody. A little more reflection back in this far side fender. Into the hood surface. Underneath it all. Come back again to this. Get that far side tire to work. Down to ground. Down to ground. Back to shadow. Looking at high impact. Again, the whole idea that's again, we said that in that meeting, the address just a few moments ago, how the whole idea that conflict or contrast is a product of the whole 9 yards. And this is what we're doing now. This contrast of ground plane, darks against lights, puts this thing into some sort of context or gives it some life. A little bit of a flare here. Let's take that shape right down inside here into the wheel well. Bring that back. Find the center line. Find the center line. Come back in. Add the detail. Sharpen the stick here. A bit of detail on top of these guys, some presence to it. And some there, and through here. Hope I'm okay for time wise, sir. Sounds good?
10:03.
Good? Let's put a little bit of tone underneath this thing. A little bit of body into it. Same back here. Again, let's kind of tighten down the tire just a bit more. A little shadow underneath this thing. Far side tire, give a little bit of the depth of the width. Very strong, overpowering front end graphic here.
So JD, while you're still working, just curious, there was a question in the chat. Why
Yes.
the idea of calling, and even as you're drawing in your calling, why do you feel like it kind of gets lost these days?
What gets lost? Pardon me again. In the process, you mean?
Yeah, the calling. Why does that kind of why can that get lost in the process these days? Maybe not necessarily for you, but maybe for others.
How do you get lost in the process?
Get lost in your calling to what you're called to do.
I'm sorry. I thought, man, okay, I thought you, well, I think I think the idea you have to sit back there is go back to that second phase in the process, for example, what the vision is, what gifts were you given? And then again, how do you begin to fabricate that into something that's going to be meaningful for you and make it matter? And I think the calling, that'll come automatically. The more you persist in, for example, saying that you can give these things back in terms of life and what you want to produce, and what you want to state in the marketplace, that calling will come about automatically. So I think that'll work out very well. That's a very difficult question based on needs, for example. But if you allow the Lord to open that up and take your gifts and manifest them and say, I can use them in these formats, that I think will be a great way to find out what your calling is. So I hope that helps.
All right, keep drawing. I got another question for you while you're working.
All right.
What, if any, is the role of journaling in your private life? And I don't know if that even inspires like what you end up creating as well. But yeah,
Oh, yeah, it does. I think a lot of that in my private life, for example, there are a lot of things I do. I'm a voracious reader. Like to be around people, for example. We get together and talk about a lot of different subject matters. So my family life, my grandchildren are extremely gifted. We have a good time chatting with them about their life situations, what they're dealing with and facing from day to day. So it's been a combination of a lot of things in my personal life. Has always been tailored to being on the call for example, on other situations and how we can help those matters come to life. That help?
Well, so there. These were a couple of questions in the chat. I'm just curious, when we start to think about conflict, because you talked about how it's something really that you need to look at the whole problem, push back the fear and the doubt. But a lot of times people want to avoid conflict. So what do you say to that?
I think that those are individuals who fear conflict. I think that might be a suffering situation where maybe in their lifetime they've been held back on certain things. Maybe there's a lack of confidence, or people who've not really truly loved them or concerned for them. Maybe it's external circumstances. That's a very difficult question to answer. But I think most people do not like comfort because they like the comfort zone. And I think the things that are comfortable for them, and I'm not being critical of that situation, so please forgive me. I think it's the comfort zone becomes so overwhelming that any disturbance along the way or any interruption that comes along really begins to bother them in terms of what do I do? How do I handle this? So I think that's one of the things that I learned from a very early age, even education, even in the primaries in Scotland, a lot of questions and Q's and A's about self-worth and what your intent in life is. So I think that's part of the process that becomes so comfortable, so forgiving, and so familiar to us that we don't want to change. And I think that's the whole idea. The change to me is a dynamic of incredible, powerful force. So I think that to me is the secret to that, I believe.
And so I'm curious now, because as I was listening to what you were saying, how has, your skill set and even just creating now and creating over the years, pushed you out of your comfort zone? Because I don't know what your comfort zones looked like prior to. But yeah, how has this and being able to do this pushed you out of your comfort zones and, you know, many different arenas?
Well, I think I've gone through a series of situations in my lifetime, for example, always external, for example, that required decisions to be made. For example, leaving Scotland was a traumatic situation. Comfort zone was disturbed. Came back to the United States, to Canada. Again, another set of circumstances to work and face toward. So all through my days, there's been situations where it's provided that conflict that has, to me, from my point of view, has created confidence. It gave me the authority. Well, the Lord gave me the authority, or presented me with the authority to really take that comfort and turn it into something that's productive.
And so out of that productivity, and this is the last question, you know, what's your advice to people, especially whether you're a creative like yourself or not, no matter what field you're in, but what is your advice to people? From what I can tell, you know, you've worked under a lot of pressure to produce things in short amounts of time. But the advice in terms of working under high pressure, but then leaning into the genius of God, what's your advice as we wrap up?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think the best answer I can give you on that one is under enormous pressure. I look at it this way. I had the pleasure years ago to tour the board mines in South Africa, and one of the ladies, they picked up this big, huge diamond gem, this large stone, and the lady asked the question, how does this come about? I said, well, this thing came about withstanding great pressure. And she said, well, how do you make it into a diamond? And he said, we chip away all the flaws. Think about that. We chip away all the flaws. So there's the answer to that whole idea. I mean, I came out of that, but again, another learning lesson about the fact that here's a very precious stone in this man's hands, very rough, very unsure, not settled in life. And the lady asked the question, how do you make this into a diamond? One, we just chip away all the flaws. So that's where the pressure should really begin to rest. Chip away all the flaws. Look through the whole screen of what you're facing and rest in the fact, stand still and rest in the fact that what you're seeing is a product of great, great significance, not trauma. Help?
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing your genius and allowing us to see it at work. We greatly,
Genius. Who
greatly
came in the room,
appreciate it.
Tanisha? Who came in the room? What genius is here?
God,
here.
of course.
Well, let me just say in closing, again, thank you so much to all the noble individuals.